There were more than 4,000 farming families in Lyons back in the 80s, and now there's less than 1,000. So the farms are bigger. There's been a lot of change in the industry. It's still a massively important sector, but it isn't as well represented, and it's difficult to get people in the farming sector to speak as one. I know that from experience because I grew up in the machinery industry in this state, and having done that, you learn a lot about forests because it's half of the business of the machinery suppliers in Tasmania. There are 50 different sectors within the forestry industry, all trying to get their piece of clear air to get their point across. And sadly, it doesn't work. And in the farming industry, there are such a lot of critical issues for the future. I don't know that that'll be easily resolved, and certainly nothing I say today is going to make a huge difference. But the determination and the skills of the current members of the TFGA, and I know there's lots of people that have different views, but certainly it's a massively difficult task, but a critical one, that they continue to pursue the able-bodied representation of that sector so that it can be properly heard, so that critical issues can be negotiated with the government, and so that the interest of members who are busy doing their thing of running their farms is managed in a way that it will come out to be the most productive for them and for our state in the long term. So with less than 1,000 farming families, I find that the electorate's full of tree changes and sea changes, not just a few. It started in the Huon a long time ago with the small titles of the apple industry. But now you find them in Ross and Campbelltown and Westbury and Deloraine and wherever you go. People that have bought a piece of quaintness, they're independently financially able, they may not be wealthy, but they've got a lot of time on their hands and they bought what they've got because that's how they want to live, which means they don't necessarily welcome economic development. They don't understand why the tractor needs to be running the pump at 6 o'clock in the morning or why the truckload of poppies needs to rumble down the main street. So that unless we have people cooperating and negotiating and working more closely together, the planning issues that are coming out of what actually has a name, it's called fettering, and it means the erosion of the traditional rights and values of country people and farmers in particular as these new settlers move in among us in small groups, small holdings of 50 or 100 hectares with a beautiful old heritage home. That usually happened because of the sheep industry or the drought, and families that couldn't continue to remain independent and to provide a future for their own children, so they sold the farm. And in many cases that's gone to a managed investment scheme, and it's growing trees these days, but within a couple of years statistically the house is sold. So it is a circumstance in a planning sense that needs a fresh look. I can relate some pretty sad circumstances for misunderstandings and arguments and indeed legal action, which we don't want to see in Lyons in the future. We need to work more closely together, and in particular the fragility of these country communities, the retention of our GPs, and the country hospitals is something that I've not had a lot of knowledge of, but certainly I know a lot more now. You only have to visit Ouse and see what happens when you apply a failed experiment which is called the silo style of health services. There are houses for sale in the main street of Ouse now that will be lucky to sell. And the old people that had to leave them left because the hospital has had its health services downgraded, and so they were no longer able to stay among their family and their kinfolk in their own hometown. Not only that, their asset has been eroded in value, because until the current government that decided to do that to the town has worked out how to get people to come back and want to live in those houses again, it's all a downhill slide. I think that Will has made a very strong case for the retention and indeed the resumption of some of those services, but we don't know exactly what those communities are asking for. We've had a couple of opportunities to go and sit down and ask them, and it occurs to us that unlike our big brother nanny state style of Labor government, the best way to go and find out what people want is to go to their towns and ask them. So last Tuesday we did that for 2 hours and sat down with 2 groups and came away with a few more pieces of that jigsaw. But clearly leaving that situation as it is will be to leave that community to founder and maybe not recover in the way that they should. We also know that if the GP from the country town leaves and goes to, take Westbury, they could go to Deloraine or to Longford. And I know that that situation's been resolved, but the trip to Deloraine means that's where the Woolworths supermarket is. So while they're there, that's where they'll shop. And they'll buy their pharmaceuticals there. So that begins the unwinding of the supermarkets, and unless there's a way of keeping health services strong, and in my own personal opinion, if I may say so, allowing seniors to remain in the communities they grew up with in a dignified and independent way as long as they possibly wish. That's the kind of government I want to belong to. And whatever that costs as a society for people that have contributed and paid their taxes for a long life, frankly, we should pay.